Hello, thank you for joining me in this journey through the Center of Migrations. My name is Kiran Kupa. I'm a Migrations and Modernization Solutions Architect with AWS. Over the past few years, had an opportunity to be part of many large-scale migrations with some of the largest and most recognizable organizations on the planet. Working through these migrations, I've experienced processes that leads to a successful and accelerated migration versus the ones that create blockers. In this session, let's walk through what a journey should look like, and I will also take this opportunity to share with you pro tips that will help you accelerate your migration journey and reduce risk. I hope it's safe to assume that you're here because you have an ongoing migration to AWS Cloud, or maybe you have one planned very soon. When we think of migrations, there are many aspects to this. At the start of the migration planning, we think of this as X number of applications that are installed on Y number of servers and a few databases and tools that can be moved one after the other very easily. But as soon as we start our migrations, things get a little more complicated than that. In the beginning, we need to think about business processes, business priorities, and total cost of running in the cloud. During the migration process, we need to think about platform security and best practices. And after the migration, we need to start planning for different operations on the cloud. The question is, where do we start and how do I get started? Should I move server by server or should I move application by application? Should I move applications first or my application related data first? What are the dependencies that I should be worried about? So what we see is that migrations are complex and long-term engagements. Good planning and the ability to think are the keys to a successful migration. So here's what a typical migration journey would look like. So let's start with some of the most common migration drivers that we see with other customers. Then we will go through the activities to perform to assess the environment. And once we are ready to mobilize our plans, we will walk through two different tracks. And this is where we will be spending most of our time today. Then we will go through the most common migration paths that the customers take. And finally, we will walk through some of the important post-migration activities. Remember that this journey can be applied consistently to organizations that are migrated to the cloud for the very first time, and also to the customers who have been operating in the cloud for many years now, or mature cloud customers. So this also applies to a single application or a single workload migration to an entire data center exit scenario with some tweaks, of course. And since migrations are long-term commitments and the need a constant steering to bring up multiple activities together, in this presentation, we will learn how to orchestrate each of these steps of the migration to maximize the velocity and reduce risk. So let's take a look at the migration drivers. As a business, we've identified the need to move into the cloud or migrate into the cloud. This need may arise from many different factors, such as a structural change to your business. It could be like mergers and acquisitions. It could be divestitures or new partnerships. Or you essentially saw a need for centralization for a heavily decentralized business unit. Or maybe recently you had an change in executive leadership. And for other customers, it's all about cost reduction or real estate consolidation and modernization. From the infrastructure point of view, a lot of times you may be out of capacity inside your data centers. There could be a disaster recovery business need, or maybe you're launching a new product or a service, or maybe you are essentially running through end of life for hardware and software inside your data centers. I see for a lot of customers, it's actually all about modernization and modernization needs, like implementing a new data and analytics workload, or maybe a HPC workload that require like specialized and customized hardware setup for performance. So I've worked with many customers in various different verticals. I've worked with both large-scale customers and really small customers as well. I've spanned across different industries like auto industry, financial services, tech services, and healthcare services. So what I've seen is that few migrations never even take off due to paralysis in analysis and at many different layers of the organization. And a few others essentially double or even triple the time to migrate to the cloud due to misalignment in the objectives. So as a business, understanding the impending event and knowing why we are migrating into the cloud and being aligned with that idea is a very critical step to migration success. So as an enterprise, you identified the workload that makes most sense to migrate in terms of both financial and business benefit. Some of these migrations are often a single application migration or a single workload migration. For example, it could be a 3-tier customer-facing web application, or it could be a data analytics application, maybe a .NET or a Java-based application. Most migrations I come across are the entire data center exit migrations that include data centers that are geographically dispersed across multiple different regions. And all of these migration conversations are usually incomplete without touching the sensitive conversations like homegrown applications with no forward-looking path, or maybe legacy non-x86 environments like mainframes. So the journey that we're taking today can be applied to all of the above scenarios with some tweaks as we go. So what I've learned from these scenarios is there are best practices available for virtually all types of workloads. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. We have industry-proven frameworks and methodologies that can help you through prescriptive guidance. And also, there are many partner tools that are available out there, and these partner tools can essentially complement the existing tool set that AWS already provides. So when you think about or when you enter the planning and the assessment phase of your migration, there are many things to consider in this phase. Based on what I've seen with many migrations, both large scale and small scale, there are three most important things that you don't want to miss. The first is the dependency mapping. Most customers start with an existing inventory of machines or applications or even a CMDB. So these are usually directionally correct, but does not give you the turn-by-turn navigation details that you would need to carry out a successful migration. In this step, if you're dealing with one single application, it could be a workshop with your application owners. But if you are dealing with an entire data center, then there are many tools available in the market today that will provide you enough detail around application to application dependency or server to server dependency or even application to database dependencies as well. Remember that this is a very important step to make sure that you're reducing the risk of breaking applications while during the process of migration, and also helps with migration wave planning down the lane in the journey. What I've seen is essentially customers running dependency mapping tools during the assessment are able to actually plan and execute their migrations much more efficiently. And this could essentially mean saving days to weeks and, more importantly, reducing risk. The second aspect or the second activity of that you need to remember or not miss during this phase is essentially the cost analysis. TCO is essentially more than just server and storage cost. If you're moving just one application, TCO might not make a whole lot of sense. But if you're moving or migrating an entire data center, then TCO becomes a much needed exercise. I've seen customers and consulting partners run through AWS calculators for server and storage cost, but many customers actually skip or even forget things like bring your own license versus license included model for operating systems and databases. There are things like enterprise agreements, service contracts, or managed service contracts. These usually have a significant impact on the total cost and also influences your final design and approach. I recently worked with a customer where bring your own license with a dedicated EC2 instance was cheaper by like 15 to 20% of the total cost. So it's definitely worth taking a trip. So always remember, TCO is not just about cost, it actually impacts your overall design and approach as well. And finally, we need to ask ourselves, are we ready for migration? In terms of business, in terms of people, governance, platform, security, and operations. At AWS, we refer to these elements as pillars of cloud adoption framework, which essentially is a white paper that you can download and go through. You can use this cloud adoption framework as a measuring stick in a self-service manner, or even AWS can actually help you run a workshop called Migration Readiness Assessment. This will essentially help you with assessing your readiness for upcoming large-scale migrations and maybe even digital transformation. So what I've learned from, again, running multiple engagements in the past, this is a highly recommended exercise. Even if you are actively using AWS platform today, every time I run this with my customers, we always uncover many gaps. And this will essentially give us an opportunity to dive deeper in the later stages of the migration journey. So moving on to the mobilize side. So now that we've done our homework on how to plan for migrations, let's mobilize ourselves and put these plans into action. This is where we are going to this is where we see this as two separate tracks, very similar to like moving into a data center. In the first track, we need to address the basic infrastructure layout first, essentially is setting up the basic infrastructure. And in the track number 2, what we're going to do is we need to build a plan on how to migrate, what approach to take, what tools to use for the migration process, and we can do this on application by application basis. So this is where we go deeper into the details of decision making. We need to set up a platform before we migrate the applications or before we even migrate the applications at any level. At AWS, we refer to this as a landing zone for workloads. So let's start with the question, do we have a landing zone? If the answer is no, then of course we're going to start building one. But many times customers already have existing setup. And if you already have an existing setup, then the question you need to ask yourself is this landing zone robust enough to handle my new workloads that are coming onto the AWS platform? Will they scale? Will they meet my needs in terms of various different aspects? If you're unsure, then this essentially you essentially have to jump into different conversations like infrastructure design and scaling. This will leads us to essentially the different epics of this particular track. And again, remember that these questions are very relevant to both a data center exit as well as a single application migration as well. So think about in terms of governance, in terms of networking, in terms of security, and if you have using a partner solution, what do you want to do with them? You have a SaaS connectivity requirements, you have operational model that you need to change and work on, and there is a lot of automation that can be applied. So at this stage, what we see is that there are 4 activities that have proven to be very, very helpful for most customers. The first one is you want to conduct a well-architected review. So if you have an existing setup, then conduct this review to make sure that you're following AWS best practices. Every time I run with the customer, we identify multiple gaps that we can improve going forward in the migration journey, or otherwise will be blockers for us. Number 2 is make sure that you conduct a multi-account structure review. So planning out AWS accounts with connectivity between them and isolation between them is essentially a very important aspect of this. And since this will be the platform for all future workloads as well, it is important that you get this right as much as possible. You don't want to be in a position where you've completed a full migration to AWS cloud and then realize that the account structure is either too flat or does not accommodate all the different business units, and now we are forced to do another AWS to AWS migration while moving the resources from one account to another account the very next year. So this also increases your technical debt. This may very well take up to 2 to 3 weeks to organize meetings with your internal stakeholders and then get their buy-ins. But this exercise is well worth spending time on. Similarly, what we see is that networking is a very important component. Reviewing your network architecture for things like routing, traffic flows, network security, device placement, transit gateway routing, traffic filtering in the east, west, and north-south bound directions, and so on and so forth. And finally, goes without saying, review your security controls and automate as much as possible. So always aim for automation in terms of security. So most of the times, these discussions have to go much more deeper. Again, with any technology component, the devil is always in the details. So you can run these different epics as different workshops, or you can combine them and have a single workshop. The idea is to come up with a finalized architecture for the landing zone. And these epics can be further broken down into different sprints if you would like to simplify your conversations. So for example, in terms of governance, the first task is usually to answer the question, how many AWS accounts do I need? How many regions should I be using? Where do I consolidate and where do I isolate? So one of the most common workloads that I see nowadays with most customers is a data lake workload, where you have like data generators, you have data consumers, and you need a location to store the data centrally somewhere. This has a huge bearing on the governance model in terms of security and cost as well. So similarly, there might be other workloads that are very specific to your business that might need a style of governance and security that you have to consider. Another example is the DC exit scenario, where if you're moving a bunch of different applications, you need to understand the different needs for different teams in terms of dev, test, prod, separation, and combination, and so on and so forth. And as the number of accounts keep growing, then you need a consistent way of managing all these different services and accounts. And this is where services like AWS Control Tower will help you simplify things quite a bit. Again, remember, even in the cloud, you need to think about your DR and HA for your critical applications. This is a fundamental design principle. So always remember to think about in terms of disaster recovery as well. And there are probably many more parameters based on your business. So it's totally up to you on what are the different applications that you're moving and change the design accordingly. Moving on, from the networking point of view, we see networking as the second layer of the foundation. Essentially, not getting this right means you will spend more time fixing it at a later point in terms of route tables and how you route the traffic between them. So take time to plan for network connectivity. IP planning, think about in terms of multi-account, routing across multiple accounts, multi-region scenarios, transit gateway scenarios, and like if you are looking to apply partner solutions like Cisco CSRs and Palo Alto devices, make sure that you're following their best practices. There might be devices for filtering and inspection of the traffic. They have to be applied to the network architecture as well. And security is applied at multiple layers, and it's always an ongoing process. The end goal should be security automation, and the best approach is to follow some form of framework like NIST. where you're thinking about in terms of planning for identification, protection, detection, automation, response, and auto recovery as much as possible. Many organizations are using SaaS solutions today. You might have a B2B business solution, or might need a B2C solution where you might need network connectivity, and connectivity options have to be there for those applications to run. So start thinking about those applications as well when you go through these migrations. Operations, again, is an essential component for ongoing maintenance. You need to start choosing the right tools and modify your operational processes and responsibilities to fit the cloud operations model. And finally, automate how much ever you can. You can use various different tools that are available in the market. AWS provides you with certain tools as well. You can use third-party tools as well to automate as much as you can. And again, there might be partner solutions throughout this process that you might be leveraging. That is something that you already have on-prem that you want to bring to the cloud, or look for partner solutions that are more cloud ready to help you run and maintain this environment. So the end result or the output of this particular workshop should be a landing zone that is ready to accept your workloads. And again, conducting a well-architected review is recommended at this stage to make sure that everything is set right. So now, moving forward, now that we have a landing zone set up, let's move forward to the journey, and talk about migrating the workloads. If you remember, we performed dependency mapping in the assessment phase of the journey. We will take that as an input for creating application migration wave plans. And here we're going to use a concept called 7R methodology, which essentially builds on the 5 Rs that was coined by Gartner back in 2011. So this will help us determine what path will my application take in terms of the migration journey. And this can be seen as relocate, rehost, replatform, repurchase, refactor, retire, and retain. So in terms of relocation is where you simply use a copy tool to move the workload into the cloud. This could be tools like VMware on AWS or even containers. Rehost, also known as lift and shift, this often represents more than half of the IT landscape on the customer side. And the approach that we would take here is pick a tool, and we essentially use that to move or relocate your workloads or lift and shift your workloads into the AWS cloud. Replatform sometimes requires modification to address some very specific needs and challenges, or provide like key benefits such as a reduced licensing cost. Think about in terms of if you are using a proprietary database on-prem, you want to move to a more license-less database services, or maybe license-related database services on AWS platform. Under repurchase, there are a lot of customers who essentially are trying to move to a SaaS-based model in some cases, where if you have a SaaS-based model like Workday or Salesforce or Drupal, then essentially those are the applications that take that repurchasing format. Refactoring, in many cases, you may want to completely reimagine your existing solutions, or maybe you want to re-architect and skip directly to the state of architecture on the AWS platform. Think about in terms of using serverless services, container-based services, or maybe a managed NoSQL managed service offering on AWS platform. So that's where refactoring comes in. And then there is always this 10 to 20% of the application in the enterprise portfolio that we see that can be simply shut off because they have been inactive and nobody noticed them for a very long time. So those can essentially be retired. And then retain refers to the workloads that you may never move to AWS for whatever business or business criticality reasons, or maybe those are applications that nobody knows how to recreate them on the cloud. Now, from the cost, time, and value perspective, relocation and rehost are the fastest and the cheapest modes to get into the cloud. On the other side, replatforming and refactoring are going to take quite a bit of time, and essentially, but they do have a higher long-term value. So what I've seen from many migrations, both large scale and small scale, is that when a customer thinks about going into the cloud, they automatically want to jump into the refactoring mode. They always want to go into the cloud with the full strength, explore the full strength of the cloud by using the native services. But what I've observed is that this often leads to analysis paralysis. And after seeing many large-scale migrations, I would recommend a rehost approach as much as possible, or a lift and shift approach as much as possible. What this will give you is essentially will give you a quick business win. And of course, there will be other applications that you will be migrating anyway, like maybe AI ML services or maybe HPC workloads that will automatically fall under some amount of refactoring anyway. So when it comes to tooling and migrations, choosing the right tool for migrating your resources also determines the migration speed and your migration success. There are different categories of tools, but you can simply view them as server migration tools like Cloud Endure or Server Migration Service or VMware on AWS. There are database migration tools that are available, like a database migration services and a schema conversion tool. And for data migration, if you're looking for an online transfer over the wire or offline transfer, there are services like DataSync that can help you do an online over the wire transfers, which might take a little longer, or maybe a storage gateway as a service. And then for the offline transfer, you have Snowball devices and Snow family of devices that can help you do that offline transfer of large amounts of data into the cloud. Now, and for legacy applications, there are migration tools available like App to Container or End of Support Migration Program for Windows Server, usually referred to as EMP. And these will help you essentially migrate those legacy applications running on out of support Windows operating systems. And there are also many migration partner tools that are available throughout the migration journey. There are tools like Cloudamize, CloudChomp, Modelize IT, BMC, Flexera. AppDynamics is one of them, Dynatrace, Datadog, Current, Device42. So there are many tools that are available out there for different purposes, and we can certainly help you identifying the right tool for the right job. So now that we understand the migration methodologies, let's quickly walk through the two most popular paths that the customers take. And there are other ones that are important as well, but they appear on case-by-case basis. So the first path is rehost and relocate, which is also known as a lift and shift. This is the fastest and the easiest way to get into the cloud. This is the true lift and shift model where you're moving your virtual machines and data into the cloud. So this is where you need to pick a migration tool, and that tool is essentially based on the workload as well. And we're going to use that tool to migrate workloads into the cloud. At this stage, I've seen some customers get hung up on the idea that lift and shift is usually bad. We don't want to take the existing problems to the cloud. But that is entirely not true. So often what really happens is there is always slight refactoring that's going to go along with that anyway. So if you think about it, there are services and tools like load balancers and auto scaling groups and traffic routing on the network, the DNS Route 53 service. So these are the services that you will be refactoring to anyway, to some extent. So what this does is essentially it gives you kind of a runway or a path to refactoring inside the cloud. So if you've heard this expression before, don't change too many things at the same time. So in that scenario, lift and shift is probably the best fit. The next path that most customers look at is replatforming and refactoring methodology. So this essentially requires much longer cycles to perform. And these typically end up being like deep dive workshops where you essentially take your existing architecture and try to map it to an equivalent architecture on the AWS platform. This could essentially mean that you're going to take a radically different approach, like moving to containerization platform or maybe even serverless platforms. So most common deep dive approaches that usually work in this scenario are like a questionnaire-based model where you're working on understanding that single application level details to map it to an equivalent AWS architecture. It could be a multi-hour, multi-day engagement or workshops with your internal teams or with AWS. It could be multiple whiteboard sessions, and it could also be something like you're using the blogs and white papers that are available on the AWS platform. And there are also tools like AWS prescriptive guidance tools, which essentially gives you, which is available for many workloads, that gives you that prescriptive guidance for the nature of workload that can be migrated into the cloud. So the idea is output of these particular sessions is going to be a migration plan that you have where you have determined which applications will move first and which will move next, and what are the dependencies and complications that are involved, and you've already picked a tool and a methodology for migration. Now that the landing zone is ready in step one, and in step two, we essentially identified what the migration plan is. That is ready as well. So this is where we start to begin to migrate. To test what we build in the previous steps and validate our approach, always start with picking 3 to 5 applications to begin with and run them through the different cycles of dev, test, and UAT environments. Running this application through will essentially prove out all the design methodologies that you had for migration and make sure that everything works fine. Always run a well-architected review before you essentially cut over to a production environment. So if you're choosing agile methodology for your migration, you can treat them as each migration wave as a sprint of your agile process, and each stage in the wave could be a story. So once you gain confidence in your approach and address the remaining gaps through the process of how you're migrating the resources, then what you can do is you can simply rinse and repeat the process for all the other different applications moving into the cloud. So after you have moved majority of your applications into the cloud, we need to start planning for the next steps, out of which probably data center decommissioning is probably the very first one that comes to mind. Just like when we're building data center layer by layer, we need to strip down things layer by layer. Example, the applications are going to move out first, then your Active Directory and DNS, then the networking gear, then you decommission your hard drives, then servers and racks get pulled out. So this could take a few months based on the size of the data center that you're in. So always make sure that you're planning ahead of time if you really have a hard data center exit time. This could also, now that your operations are being established throughout the process of migration, and now that you're in the cloud, you need to make sure that your operation framework is solid in terms of running and maintaining things in the cloud. Game days is something that I recommend to test out your resiliency and production readiness once your workloads are in the cloud. Complete establishing your ITIL integrations for the workloads, and then conduct ongoing well-architected reviews for individual applications. As once the application moves into the cloud, there's always some form of refactoring that is happening. So always make sure you conduct well-architected reviews before pushing anything into production. Cost optimization, again, is a needed exercise because you're paying on the cloud, you pay as you go. A lot of times it's always good to have checks and balances and have a mechanism to go take a look at where you can optimize and leverage things like reserved instances and saving plans once you identify what your steady state is. And this can also be done in a self-service manner using the AWS platform. There are services in the console that can help you identify what are the machines that are running idle, and maybe there is a room for optimization. Now, remember, you're not alone in this journey. We have over 80 plus migration competency partners that have established migration practices. And these are AWS certified consultants that you can leverage. So they are audited annually as well against their competencies to provide you with the best partner experience. All right, we finally reached the end of the migration journey. So now that you are in the cloud, there is always room for more optimization, modernization, and innovation with most of the cloud native services. So it's an ongoing process, and we will continue migrating more workloads and keep make improvements to the existing workloads. So finally, if you don't remember everything that I covered in this session, I want you to take away these 5 things from this session. First is the business and people alignment is necessary ingredient for migration success. Remember that. Number 2 is avoid analysis paralysis. Don't let the complexity of migrations discourage you from moving forward. We have proven methodologies that can help you through this process. Number 3 is readiness assessment. I think it's a mandatory exercise, even if you're in the cloud for a very long time. Number 4 is infrastructure setup and planning. It is worth spending time up front to create a robust landing zone that suits your business and make sure that you are not ending up doing a double bubble migration at a later point. Number 5 is leverage AWS and AWS partner network. Remember that there are no brownie points for reinventing the wheel here. Leverage the existing collective knowledge to accelerate your migrations and reduce risk. Again, to continue learning about migrations beyond this session, please visit aws.training and search for migrations. There are many resources that are available to you in the form of digital training and classroom training and white papers. And there are also guides that can help you improve your migration journey. With that, thank you for joining me in this journey through the Center of Migrations. And as always, your feedback is very important to us. So please do fill out the session survey. Thank you again.